The human took the princess's punishment without a word. And that was the first time the Empire understood that Earth did not send heroes to win applause. Earth sent them to stand where everyone else broke. Captain Elias Venn was not chained because he had committed a crime. He was chained because Princess Aralith had shown mercy in a court that fed on obedience. Because she had opened the lower gates during the siege and let 40,000 starving refugees into the royal shield. Because old nobles with jeweled throats called hungry children a strategic burden. Because the Emperor, her own brother, needed the galaxy to believe mercy had consequences. So when the Crimson Tribunal gathered beneath the mirrored dome of Vale Saroon, with a billion citizens watching through crystal screens, Aralith stood accused of weakness, treason, softness, and betrayal, while the human beside her listened like a man hearing rain. He had been her military advisor for 90 days, the only Terran attached to the dying Imperial court, a quiet officer with gray eyes, scarred hands, and a habit of noticing servants before ministers. He had taught her how to retreat without shame, how to feed a city before defending a palace, how to speak to soldiers as if they were souls instead of banners. And now the court called those lessons corruption. The Emperor leaned forward on the obsidian throne and declared that the princess would receive the old punishment of the line. 30 strokes beneath the solar lash. Public, lawful, unforgettable, Aralith did not flinch. But the smallest tremor passed through her fingers, because the solar lash did not cut flesh alone. It burned nerve and memory. It left no blood for poets, only pain that lived in the bones. The crowd roared for justice, and the nobles smiled. Then Elias stepped one pace forward and said one sentence, clear enough for every moon to hear, under Article 9 of the Terran Alliance Compact. A bonded protector may accept the lawful punishment of the royal principal. If the charge arose under his counsel, the hall went silent. The Emperor asked if he understood what he was offering. Elias looked once at Aralith, and she saw no fear. No performance, no romance. Only a tired human certainty older than empire. Then he answered, yes. That was the moment cruelty realized it had been invited to strike the wrong species. Aralith tried to refuse. Of course she did. Her crown braid shook as she turned on him, whispering, no, no, Elias. You cannot. But he did not answer her, not because he ignored her. Never because of that, but because, if he answered, his voice might become kindness, and kindness would make her beg. He only removed his coat and folded it neatly. As if the tribunal floor were a barracks bunk, and not a place designed to humiliate bloodlines. Beneath it, he wore a plain black uniform without medals, because humans often hid their legends where vanity could not reach them. The guards hesitated before binding him to the punishment frame. They were Valari, tall, silver-skinned, bred for ceremonial cruelty and terrified of looking uncertain. One of them muttered that the device was calibrated for royal physiology, not human endurance. The Emperor said, adjust nothing. He wanted a lesson. And lessons were always stronger when they looked unfair. Aralith lunged. 2 handmaidens caught her. And for the first time in her life, the princess sounded less like a ruler than a girl watching a door close forever. Elias, please, I command you, stop this. He finally turned his head just enough for her to see his profile. The old scar at his jaw, the calm in his eyes, and he said, your people need you standing after this. Mine taught me how to kneel. Then he faced forward again. The Lashmaster lifted the solar cord, a thread of white fire braided with law, tradition, and fear. Around the hall, senators settled comfortably. Generals crossed their arms, priests opened silver books. Every faction of the Empire prepared to watch a human understand his place. The first stroke fell across Elias's back with a sound like a star snapping. His body arched once against the restraints. His teeth closed hard enough to crack, but no cry came. The screens across the Empire brightened, expecting the second stroke to pull a scream out of him. It did not. The third stroke came, then the fourth. And the human breathed through them like a mountain learning weather. By the 7th stroke, the nobles were no longer smiling. By the 10th, soldiers in the gallery had stopped chanting. By the 12th, Aralith was crying silently. not because he suffered, though that tore her open, but because he was making her punishment into a message none of them had meant to send. Pain was supposed to make him smaller. Instead, it made the room smaller around him. The punishment continued, and with every stroke, the Empire learned a new shape of silence. Elias did not curse the Emperor, did not insult the court, did not call on Earth, did not ask for mercy, not even when the lash burned through uniform, skin, muscle memory. Not even when the frame beneath his hands began to smoke, the Lashmaster, whose family had served royal punishments for 6 centuries, faltered at stroke 16. Because professionals of pain know the difference between pride and surrender. And the human showed neither. He was not pretending he could not feel it. His hands clenched, his breath shuddered. Sweat poured from his hairline. Every tendon in his arms stood like cables under strain. He felt all of it. That was the terror of him. He felt it and still chose not to give cruelty the sound it wanted in the worker districts of Vale Saroon. Furnace crews stopped mid-shift before public screens, refugees huddled in ration halls. Children who had been allowed into the shield because of Aurelith watched with huge eyes. On orbital stations, dock soldiers removed their helmets. In barracks across 11 moons, Imperial infantry who had once mocked humans as mud-born death addicts stared at the chained Terran and said nothing. Even the enemy prisoners kept beneath the capital. Korathi raiders captured during the siege lifted their heads as the punishment broadcast echoed through the cells. The 17th stroke hit, Elias sagged. And Aurelith screamed at last, "Stop. I withdraw my mercy. I confess anything. Stop." The Emperor raised one hand, considering whether to end it there, because her collapse would serve him well. But Elias lifted his head before the court could enjoy her ruin. His voice came out broken, rough, but steady enough to travel. "Your Majesty, the sentence was 30. The hall shivered, not from pity, not yet. From the realization that he was holding the law more faithfully than the throne, the Emperor lowered his hand, ashamed into cruelty, and the lash fell again. 18, 19, 20, each number became a hammer. Each silence became an accusation by stroke 23. The Lashmaster was weeping by stroke 25. General Sarek of the Inner Spears turned his face away by stroke 27. The palace priests had closed their books because no scripture had prepared them for a sacrifice. Made by a foreigner on behalf of a princess, his species did not rule. The 30th stroke landed with a flash that whitened every screen in the Empire. Elias collapsed against the restraints. Alive, smoking, silent, and in that silence, something ancient inside Vale Saroon cracked. The Empire had gathered to watch mercy punished. Instead, it watched mercy refuse to die. When they released him, Elias fell to one knee, then to both hands, and nobody laughed. Aurelith tore free of her attendants and reached him before the guards did. Her royal sleeves dragging through ash, her jeweled cuffs cutting her wrists as she tried to lift him. "Elias, speak to me," she said, and he blinked as if returning from a battlefield far away. He tried to stand, failed, tried again, and the second attempt made the soldiers in the gallery move without orders. 6 of them stepping forward before remembering protocol. The Emperor saw it, the small betrayal of instinct, the way bodies loyal to the throne had moved toward the punished man instead of away from him, and his mouth tightened. Elias finally rose with Aurelith under one arm and 2 trembling guards near his shoulders. He bowed, not deeply, not obediently, only enough to acknowledge the law he had used against them. Then he said to the Emperor, "Sentence completed. Her Highness remains legally unblemished." The Emperor looked at his sister, tear-streaked, furious, transformed in the eyes of the people from accused princess into the one person someone had burned for. And he knew he had made a political mistake large enough to cast a shadow over stars. So he sharpened his voice and said, "Let all citizens remember that imperial law stands above sentiment." Aurelith answered before fear could stop her, "Yes, brother." "And today a human honored it better than you," the chamber gasped. Elias's hand tightened weakly at her sleeve, warning her to survive, but the words had escaped. And once a royal truth leaves the mouth, it becomes a creature with wings. The Emperor did not punish her again. Not there, not with Elias bleeding beside her. Not with soldiers looking suddenly human in the worst possible way. He dismissed the tribunal with a gesture cold enough to freeze applause. But no applause came. The broadcast ended in silence. And silence traveled faster than any decree. In the lower city, refugees began repeating the image. Not the law, not the emperor, the image. A human taking punishment for a princess who had fed them in the barracks. Soldiers replayed the moment Elias demanded the full sentence. Not because he loved pain, but because half mercy makes a hostage of the rescued. In noble houses, families argued behind sealed doors. Some called him manipulative, some called him savage. Some called him holy, none called him weak. But the most dangerous thing in any empire is not rebellion. It is respect moving where the throne did not permit it. The emperor's name was Corinne IX, and he had inherited the throne the way some inherit a blade, carefully, with blood wiped away before anyone notices. He was not stupid, that made him worse. A foolish tyrant hits until the world turns on him. A clever one teaches the world to call bruises stability. Karen had kept the empire together through famine, border war, pirate moons, and noble conspiracy. And he believed every mercy was a crack enemies could widen. His sister had always been dangerous to him because people loved her before she asked them to. And love outside state control made emperors itch. When Elias took the punishment, Corinne felt not pity but exposure. The human had revealed the hidden ugliness of imperial order without shouting once. So Karen summoned his ministers into the Black Garden, beneath trees genetically trained to bloom only for crowned blood, and ordered a counter-narrative. The human had performed a Terran dominance ritual, they would say. He had exploited obscure treaty law to embarrass the throne. Princess Arelith was emotionally compromised. The refugees she saved included spies. Mercy had nearly doomed the capital. The message spread through official channels by noon, by sunset. Dock workers had painted 30 white lines on cargo walls, one for each stroke, by midnight. Children in the lower city were wearing strips of black cloth across their shoulders by morning. Soldiers arriving for parade found someone had carved a sentence into the base of Emperor Velen I. He took what she was owed, so we owe what he protected. The secret police arrested 12 suspects, then 40, then 200. Which only taught the city that the sentence mattered enough to frighten armed men. Arelith begged Elias to remain hidden until he healed. He refused because hiding would let the emperor turn him into myth. And myths are easier to edit than witnesses. On the 7th day, still pale, still bandaged beneath a black coat, he walked with her through the refugee quarter. The smell of boiled grain and medicine filled the air. People knelt as she passed, not with old ceremonial precision, but with the uneven urgency of those who had survived because someone disobeyed policy. A child approached Elias, holding a cup of water in both hands. The palace guards moved to stop him. Elias shook his head, accepted the cup, and drank like it was a medal. The crowd saw his hands tremble, saw the edge of burn scars at his collar, saw the princess's face harden every time he hid pain, and a different empire began forming in their minds, one not built from conquest outward, but from responsibility inward. That evening, 3 regiments of the Inner Spears sent petitions asking that the refugee gates remain open under military protection. The emperor rejected them. 2 captains resigned. 1 colonel was arrested, and General Serac requested private audience with the princess. Rebellion did not begin with a gun. It began with soldiers asking who deserved their obedience. General Serac arrived without banners, which in the palace meant either humility or treason. He was old by Valari standards, his silver hair braided with campaign rings, his left eye replaced by a war lens that clicked whenever he lied. It did not click when he knelt before Arelith. "Your Highness," he said, "I served your father. I served the throne. But I watched that human hold our law, while our emperor used it like a whip. And I find myself uncertain where the throne currently resides." Arelith's breath caught Elias, leaning near the window, because chairs still made his back burn. Said, "Careful, General, uncertainty can get honest men killed." Serac looked at him. It appears certainty does too. The princess almost smiled. Almost Sarek brought reports, not rumors. Korathi fleets had regrouped beyond the Vare Nebula. The siege had not ended. Only paused. Their warlord, Thane Orvox, had watched the tribunal broadcast and concluded the Empire was divided. Which was true. He was moving 3 planet cracker carriers toward Vale Saroon, shielded by stolen Imperial codes, in 8 days. Perhaps less. The capital would face another attack. Kirin planned to close the lower shields, preserve the palace district, abandon the refugee quarter as buffer ground, then blame Aurelith's mercy for the death toll. The room went very still. Elias asked for maps. Aurelith asked for proof. Sarek gave both. And the shape of her brother's coming betrayal appeared in cold blue light across the war table. Refugee districts marked in gray, palace districts in gold, artillery arcs positioned to fire through civilian streets. Not around them. Aurelith covered her mouth. But no tears came this time. Some grief freezes too hard for weeping. Elias studied the projections with the detached calm of a man putting rage into useful boxes. How many troops still obey you? He asked Sarek, personally. 3 regiments. Morally, perhaps 7. Legally, none. Elias nodded. Good. Never start with the legal ones. They wait to see who survives. Aurelith turned to him. We cannot fight my brother and the Korathi at once. Elias looked at the gray refugee zones. Then at the gold palace shield. You do not fight both. You make him choose in public. She understood then, not the whole plan, but the human shape of it. Mercy not as softness. Mercy as a blade placed where cruelty must either drop its mask or cut itself. They would force the emperor to defend the people or be seen abandoning them. They would move soldiers into the lower districts under the old disaster authority, distribute Terran shield anchors through refugee clinics, reroute power from palace luxuries to civilian barriers, and broadcast every order openly so secrecy could not be used to strangle them. It was illegal, perhaps, but illegality had become a crowded room in Vale Saroon. Before Sarek left, he looked once more at Elias. Did Earth know this would happen when they sent you? The human answered, Earth suspected you had an empire, and that the princess had a conscience. In our experience, those 2 things eventually collide. When the Korathi returned, they did not come like raiders. They came like judgment-wearing engines. The sky over Vale Saroon darkened at dawn, not with clouds, but with ships. Korathi carriers slid from the nebula shadow. Vast black crescent hulls veined with orange reactor light surrounded by destroyers and breach pods. The capital sirens screamed, palace shields rose first, exactly as Karen had planned, a golden dome over towers, gardens, treasury vaults, noble sanctuaries, while the lower city waited beneath a flickering civilian grid starved for power. Official channels declared temporary shield sequencing. Citizens were ordered to remain calm. Calm is what rulers request when panic would be evidence. Then Princess Aurelith appeared on every emergency screen in armor, without jewels. With General Sarek at her right and Captain Elias Ven at her left, visibly injured, visibly standing. She did not accuse her brother, not yet. She simply read the Imperial Disaster Law aloud, the old statute requiring royal blood to safeguard the maximum number of civilians during planetary assault. By my authority as first daughter of the line, she said, all non-essential palace power is transferred to the lower shield. All available troops are ordered to defend civilian sectors. Any officer who refuses may explain to the ancestors why Silk outranked children. The order passed through military bands, dock bands, worker radios, hacked theater speakers, prayer towers, kitchen walls, anywhere sound could survive. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then the lower shield brightened, weakly at first, then fiercely. As engineers across the city rerouted power without waiting for permission, palace fountains died, noble climate domes failed. The Emperor's private sunrise chamber went dark, and 40,000 refugees looked up as blue light strengthened above their roofs. Kirin responded with fury disguised as law. He appeared from the throne room and commanded all forces to disregard unauthorized orders, but the split screen betrayed him. One side showing his gold hall, polished and safe, the other showing his sister in the lower city while Korathi fire fell toward her. Soldiers made their choice in the space between those images. Not all of them, never all, but enough. The first orbital strike hit the blue shield over the refugee quarter and rolled across it like a burning ocean. Elias staggered from the shockwave. Arelith grabbed him and he said through clenched teeth, "Tell the western batteries to fire late. Let the first wave think the shield is weaker than it is." She relayed the order. Sarok stared. "That invites them closer," Elias said. "Yes." Close enough to regret being right, the Korathi breach pods descended. Thousands of black needles aimed at civilian streets. Valerie gunners waited past fear, waited past instinct, waited until Elias raised one shaking hand. Then every hidden battery in the lower city opened fire. Not the clean, ceremonial volleys of palace war, but brutal human-timed crossfire, angles mapped from market roofs, clinic towers, sewage heat vents, abandoned transit spines. The sky filled with dying machines, and beneath that burning sky, the punished man began teaching an empire how to fight for its people. Elias should not have been in command. Every physician had said so. Arelith had said so with tears sharpened into orders. Elias had answered by asking whether any of the physicians had defended a city while its government tried to murder its own poor. When none replied, he put on his coat. The battle became a street-by-street argument between two visions of power. Korathi forces expected panic below and politics above. Instead, they found refugee volunteers carrying ammunition, palace cooks converting banquet lifts into med evacuators, priests tearing silver altar cloth into bandages, children running coded light signals from windows because human, analog methods worked when Korathi jamming killed the network. Arelith moved through it all like a flame-learning discipline, not protected in the old way, not hidden behind guards, but present where fear thickened, speaking names when she knew them, kneeling beside wounded workers, ordering noble storehouses opened for medical supplies. Every act was recorded, every act broadcast, not by palace media but by citizens, and Corinne could not stop the images without blinding his own military. Elias coordinated from a transit command bunker beneath the old opera house. His back bled through bandages by midday, though he hid it until Arelith saw red at his collar and went white with anger. "You are dying by increments," she said. He did not look up from the map. Most people do. "I am trying to keep the increments useful." She wanted to hate him for that. Because humans made sacrifice sound like logistics. But then the northern shield collapsed and hatred became luxury. Korathi's shock troops breached District 9, where the refugee children had been moved. Arelith ordered her guard to redeploy. Elias overrode her. "No, too slow." "Send the palace honor cavalry," she stared. They answered to Chiron. Elias said, "Send the order in his name," from his own emergency code. Sarek's war lens clicked as he realized. Stolen codes, Orvax has them. So do we now. Elias did not smile. Humans reserve smiles for better sins. The order went out, and Karen's prized honor cavalry, waiting uselessly beneath the palace dome, received what appeared to be an imperial command to charge into the lower city. Some officers hesitated. Then the broadcast showed children trapped in District 9. And hesitation died of shame. Silver cavalry poured from the palace gates into fire. Citizens watching from shelters saw noble sons and daughters ride where their parents had argued no value existed. The empire did not become good in that instant. Empires never do. But it became confused about its own cruelty. And confusion can be the first wound in a monster. The enemy thought they were invading a divided world. They had not understood that humans know how to turn wounds into doors. By evening, Thane Orvax grew impatient. Korathi doctrine despised long battles. They preferred terror, collapse, submission, and harvest. Vale Saroon was doing the unforgivable, enduring publicly, worse. The human advisor had infected their defensive pattern with ugly resilience. No perfect shield, no elegant command chain, no single system to hack, only dozens of stubborn little failures refusing to become one large failure. Orvax opened a channel to the capital and demanded surrender. His armored face appeared above the city, tusked, scarred, amused in the way of butchers who mistake exhaustion for permission. People of Vale Saroon, he said, your emperor hides, your princess bleeds, your shields weaken. Give us the lower districts, and we will spare the palace. It was a clever offer, aimed at the old empire. The empire that would trade strangers for marble, Karen moved to accept privately. But Aralith cut into the same frequency before he could finish selling souls. She stood in the refugee square, smoke behind her, ash in her hair. Elias barely upright beside her, and answered, I am Princess Aralith of the Starline. The lower districts are the empire. The workers are the empire. The children are the empire. The wounded are the empire. If you want the empire. Come through us, Orvax laughed. Then perhaps I should speak to the human who taught you defiance. Elias stepped closer to the transmitter, and for the first time since the punishment, the whole empire heard his voice at length. Thane Orvax, he said. You are currently committing 17 tactical errors, but I understand arrogance makes counting difficult. The city froze. Aralith turned slowly, half horrified, half alive. Orvax's smile faded. Elias continued. Your carriers are too close to atmosphere. Your destroyer screen is compensating for civilian jamming you believe accidental. Your stolen Imperial codes are 3 hours out of date. Your landing pods are tracking heat signatures we moved into empty tunnels. And your flagship is broadcasting through a relay we identified 20 minutes ago. Orvax snarled. You bluff. Humans do, Elias said. But not when we are tired. He gave Serac one nod across Vale Saroon. Refugee engineers, dock crews, and Terran signal drones triggered the trap. The empty tunnels below District 9 ignited with false heat and magnetic bloom, drawing Korathi reinforcements into kill corridors. The civilian jamming resolved into a targeting lattice. Palace Honor cavalry marked breach points with ancestral flare lances, and from orbit, 3 small Terran ships that had been hiding cold behind the broken moon fired kinetic rods through the gap that Korathi destroyers had opened themselves. Orvax's left carrier split down the spine in a line of white fire. The city did not cheer at first. The sight was too large, too impossible. Then the shockwave reached the upper clouds, and every shelter erupted for the first time in generations. Vale Saroon did not cheer for conquest. It cheered because children were still breathing. At the height of the counterattack, Elias finally collapsed over the transit map. Not dramatically, not with a heroic speech, but like a machine whose last bolt had been asked to hold up a star. The nearest soldier who reached him wore Karen's own crest. A palace guard named Vale, one of the men who had held Aralith back during the punishment. He dropped his rifle and pressed both hands to Ilias's reopened wounds. Shouting for medics with a panic that sounded like repentance, Aralith knelt beside him, calling his name. Elias tried to focus, failed. Then smiled faintly because humans sometimes waste strength on mercy, even when they have none to spare. Still here, he whispered, very inconveniently. She said, voice breaking. The medics dragged him toward the field surgery alcove under covering fire, and the sight spread across every screen. Palace guard carrying human refugee child holding plasma pack, princess walking beside the sled with blade raised, refusing to leave until Elias cleared the blast doors. Something passed through the military then, not an order, not a signal, a decision. Units still loyal to Kurin began ignoring palace command. Not with speeches, but with redirected fire. Delayed compliance, opened gates, shared ammunition. The Emperor screamed from the throne room that the princess had usurped defense authority, but his words reached soldiers currently alive because she had usurped it, and law began losing to evidence. Kurin ordered the royal dreadnought Crown Eternal to reposition above the lower city and prepare a sterilizing strike if Korathi forces overran the districts. Aralith heard the order through Sarac's intercepted channel and went colder than fear. A sterilizing strike would kill invaders, defenders, refugees, everyone. It was the old imperial logic in its purest form. Save the symbol, burn the wound. The dreadnought captain, Lady Maris, requested confirmation twice. Karen gave it twice, then Elias. barely conscious on a medic sled, grabbed Arlith's wrist. "Broadcast it," he said. She leaned close. "What, broadcast him? Do not argue? Let the Empire hear him choose." So she did. Sarek opened the command channel to public emergency bands, and Karen's voice poured across Vale Saroon, cold, clear, unmistakable. "Authorize sterilization of lower sectors if breach probability exceeds 40%. Preserve palace continuity at all costs." The words struck harder than any orbital shell in shelters. Citizens looked at one another and understood exactly how much their lives weighed. On Crown Eternal, Lady Maris stood beneath the Emperor's command seal, surrounded by officers waiting for her to become history. She had watched the punishment, watched the lower shield rise, watched the princess stand in fire, watched the human burn and bleed and still ask only that others live. Her hand hovered over the authorization glyph. Then she removed her captain's ring and placed it on the console. "Crown Eternal rejects unlawful mass execution of Imperial citizens," she said. Karen ordered her arrest. No one moved. The dreadnought turned its guns away from the lower city and toward the Korathi carrier line. That was when the throne still existed, but obedience left it. With Crown Eternal firing in defense of the lower districts, the battle became a rout. Terran ships coordinated with Veilari dreadnought guns. Sarek's regiments pushed Korathi troops into collapsing pockets. Honor cavalry cut supply corridors. Refugee militias guided civilians through safe tunnels and marked enemy ambushes with kitchen smoke. The Korathi had planned to harvest a divided empire. Instead, they found a wounded empire discovering that its limbs still belonged to the same body. Thane Orvax attempted retreat, but Elias, from a field surgery table, noticed the vector on a cracked tactical screen and rasped one word. "Faint." Aurelith bent over him. "Stop commanding while open." He ignored that entirely, which was rude but consistent. "Orvax is turning his flagship behind the moon debris. He will fire on the city from retreat angle. Tell Maris to aim at empty space above the western horizon." Aurelith did not question him this time. Trust, once bought with suffering, spends quickly and saves lives. Crown Eternal fired where no enemy appeared. Citizens watching thought madness had taken the dreadnought. Then Orvax's flagship emerged into the exact place Elias predicted, its cloaking field disrupted by the shot. Its belly exposed. The Terran kinetic frigate struck next. 3 rods through reactor spine, Maris finished with a lance broadside that cut the flagship in half. Orvax died with his surrender channel unopened, which was perhaps the first mercy he had never earned by midnight. The last Korathi breach team surrendered outside a refugee bakery, surrounded by palace guards, dock workers, and 3 furious grandmothers holding welding torches. Vale Saroon survived, but survival has a way of asking who tried to prevent it. The city did not sleep. It gathered, first in shelters, then streets, then plazas, a tide of civilians moving toward the palace, not with weapons raised, but with proof. 30 white lines painted on coats, blue refugee bands on wrists, recordings of Karen's sterilization order playing from handheld speakers. Soldiers did not stop them. Some joined. Aurelith wanted to go to them, but Elias was in surgery, and for one selfish hour, she chose the room over the revolution. The physicians worked with shaking precision, sealing lash trauma torn open by battle, replacing blood, cooling nerve burn, cursing human stubbornness in 3 languages. At last, the chief physician told her he might live. Might was not enough, but it was a country she could stand in. Sarek entered, armor blackened, face grave. "The people are at the palace gates. Your brother demands your arrest. Crown Eternal has refused. The lower regiments await your word." Aurelith looked at Elias behind the surgical glass, asleep beneath machines. Smaller, somehow without the force of his will filling the room. "What would he advise?" Sarek asked. She wiped her face. "He would tell me not to let someone else pay my cost twice." Then she walked to the gates. The Empire expected a claimant, but the princess came as a witness. Aurelith stood above the palace steps where her ancestors had announced conquests, marriages, executions, taxes, and the names of moons renamed after vain men. Below her stretched more citizens than she had known the capital could hold. Refugees wrapped in blankets, soldiers with cracked armor, nobles pale behind guarded balconies, workers still wearing heat gloves, children on shoulders, priests without books, pilots, cooks, smugglers, clerks, widows. Everyone history usually crushed into numbers. Karen appeared on the high balcony behind her in full imperial regalia, crown blazing with stored sunlight. Flanked by a loyal black guard, he looked magnificent. Which is the oldest trick of power, he declared Aerolith guilty of military sedition, conspiracy with foreign powers, emotional instability, unlawful appropriation of defense assets, and endangerment of the imperial line. The charges rolled over the crowd like dead leaves. When he finished, Aerolith did not defend herself first. She activated the Great Public Archive, the one no ruler used honestly because memory is dangerous when citizens can access it. She played the tribunal. Elias stepping forward, the punishment, the sentence completed. She played Karen's orders closing palace shields, then her own orders opening lower power. She played Orvax, offering to spare the palace for the lower districts. She played Karen's sterilization command, twice, because some sins deserve echoes. Then she spoke. Brother, I did break your order, I did seize your power, I did conspire with soldiers, workers, doctors, and a human who understood our law better than we did. I did all of this because an empire that survives by sacrificing its people has already surrendered. Corinne descended the steps slowly, fury contained behind royal training. You confuse sentiment for rule, he said. People love you today because fear is loud. Tomorrow, they will need grain. Patrols, courts, taxes, prisons, borders. You cannot govern with tears and foreign martyrdom. Aerolith looked over the crowd, then back at him. No, but I can begin by not murdering them. He struck her then, open-handed before the entire capital. The crowd surged. Soldiers lifted weapons. But Aerolith raised one hand and stopped them. Her cheek burned. Her voice did not. You see, she said softly, this is what he does when witnessed. Imagine what he ordered when unseen. Karen realized the mistake at once. But pride is often intelligence, arriving too late. He ordered the Black Guard to seize her. They moved, then the Palace Guard veil. The same man who had once helped restrain her stepped between them and drew his sword. Not against the Empire, he said, against its shame. One by one, soldiers followed, silver blades clearing scabbards, not in rebellion against Vale Saroon, but in defense of what Vale Saroon had become during the battle. General Sarek removed his campaign rings and laid them at Aerolith's feet. Crown Eternal transmitted recognition of Princess Aerolith as lawful defender under disaster succession statutes. The crowd did not chant her name. Not at first. They chanted another word. 30, 30, 30, until the number became indictment. Oath and crown, Karen backed away. Abandoned by the sound of his own law returning with teeth, he was arrested without bloodshed, which disappointed several grandmothers with welding torches. But pleased the historians, peace did not arrive like a sunrise. It arrived like workers clearing rubble, one honest stone at a time, years later. When children of Vale Saroon asked why the Day of 30 was observed with silence instead of fireworks, their teachers told them the simple version first, that a princess saved refugees, that an emperor punished her by punishing her protector, that a human endured, that the people saw, that the throne changed hands. Children like simple versions because they are doors. And someday, they grow tall enough to enter the harder rooms behind them. The harder truth was this. Elias Venn did not save the Empire by suffering. Suffering alone saves nothing. Many had suffered before him and been buried under official language. He saved it because he chose the exact place where suffering would become visible. Lawful, undeniable, shared, he turned private cruelty into public testimony. He made citizens ask why a foreigner honored them more than their sovereign. He made soldiers ask whether obedience without conscience was still service. He made a princess ask not how to be loved, but what love required her to protect. The Empire watched because the Emperor wanted fear, and in watching, the Empire became a witness against him. That was the human gift, not invincible bodies. Though they endured terribly, not superior weapons. Though their weapons were practical and rude, not noble speeches. Though their quiet words could ruin tyrants, the gift was this stubborn belief that pain paid for another's dignity should not be wasted, that mercy must be defended with teeth, that law must serve the living or be dragged into the light and made to confess. Elias lived long enough to see the first gardens bloom in the rebuilt lower district. Children climbed fruit trees where breech pods had fallen. Soldiers bought bread from refugees they had once been ordered to abandon. And Queen Aralith walked without a crown among them every day of 30. At the center of the square stood no statue of the emperor, no image of conquest, only 30 white stones in a circle around an empty cup. The cup a child had given a wounded human, the cup he had kept on his belt ever since. On his final visit before Earth recalled him for good, Elias stood beside Aralith at the stones. Older, healed badly, still uncomfortable with gratitude. The crowd waited for a speech. He gave them one sentence. Because humans are wasteful with courage, but stingy with words, do not thank me by remembering pain. Thank me by refusing to pass it downward. Then he bowed to the queen, to the workers, to the children, to the soldiers, and to the grandmothers, with welding torches, who still watched him like jailers. Aralith walked him to the Terran shuttle as dusk turned the city blue. You came as an advisor, she said. You leave as part of our law. Elias looked back at the shield towers, the gardens, the hospital windows. The palace no longer glowing above the city, but wired into it. Then he said, No, I leave as proof that your law can change. She took his hand once, not as queen to soldier, not as princess to protector, but as one survivor to another. The engines warmed, the crowd stood silent. 30 breaths held across a plaza, and when the shuttle rose, no anthem played, no cannons fired, no banners fell, only silence followed him upward. The same silence he had given them under the lash, but changed now, not the silence of fear, not the silence of pain, the silence of people choosing to remember before speaking. And beneath that silence, an empire that had once gathered to watch a princess broken kept building a world where no one would ever again need a human to take their punishment without a word.